From in the beginning to the musical apocalypse, this is The Bible Says What. I'm your host, Mike Wiseman. What keeps the believer believing? Yahweh never physically shows up. Jesus never stops by for dinner. Yet Christians will assert their deity's existence till they're blue in the face. Some use it as a crutch, a security blanket, and don't want to let go. No matter how much truth and logic you dump on them, their minds are made up. Definitely a major factor is indoctrination or brainwashing, which is very hard to break in some cases. The funny part about the indoctrination or brainwashing is that most Christians believe the same about us atheists. It's the strangest thing. They have somehow convinced themselves that atheists are the ones who have been brainwashed. They believe the world or Satan has influenced or caused us in some magical way to question the Bible, to deny the existence of Yahweh. They turn it all around and point the finger at someone else. Some are scared. They have been so horribly indoctrinated that the mere thought of denying the validity of their God terrifies them. I was taught to never deny my belief. I was told stories of Christians being lined up and ordered to deny their faith or be shot. When they all refused, they were slaughtered. I was to be like them. I was taught that those who deny Yahweh to save their own skin are considered lukewarm Christians, and lukewarm Christians are spat out. Revelation 3:16. They told us that there might come a time when I have to make that very choice. If I made the wrong choice, Jesus will act as if he never knew me. Matthew 7:21-23. This life was only temporary, and if you deny Yahweh before you die, you will be thrown into the lake of fire. Revelation 20:15. To me, as a small child, the threats were made real by the adults advocating for its validity. That kind of indoctrination is difficult to break. The fear of hell stays with you for a long time. No child should ever have to go through that. Let's start the show.
Is there anything in the Bible that you yourself have an issue with? Okay, so it took you reading the Bible to realize that those things were bad for you?
Yeah, it actually did. I didn't
figure this out on your own?
No, Ted Bundy could be redeemed. God doesn't kill children.
What do you think the Passover was? Yahweh sets up a whole system in the Old Testament where you slaughter animals just so he's able to forgive you.
Today's special guest is pastor, author, podcaster, and all-around very talented man, Peter Laws. Welcome to the show, Peter.
Hello. I love the talented bit. Wow. I like that. But mind you, I have a very small range of talents. I don't know if you're like that, but
well,
you try to kind of emphasize the small range and don't tell anyone else about the massive failures.
Well, the ones I've encountered are pretty. You're pretty good at, man. You're pretty good at
Oh,
your
thanks,
podcast. All them different voices is pretty impressive.
Yes. Yeah, it's pretty crazy because the podcast I do does involve like characters as part of it, and in an ideal world, I would ask friends or actors and people who know what they're doing to do that, but it would take too long and it's a bit of a hassle. So I thought, I'll attempt to just do them myself because I'm kind of cheap and quick.
Well, you did a good job. I was impressed.
Thanks.
Nice. Well, you're author of a whole series of books. It starts with Purged, correct?
Yeah, that's right. I'm mainly known as an author of fiction, but also do a little bit of nonfiction. But yeah, Purged is the first novel in my fiction series, in which the main character is a guy called Matt Hunter, who is an ex-church minister turned atheist professor, and he spends his time like sort of on the trail of crazed Christian evangelical serial killers and basically people who kind of have a warped view of faith in Christianity. So in Purged, as an example, he is trying to track down a serial killer who thinks the most loving thing to do would be to baptize people and then murder them immediately afterwards. So that way, they won't lose their faith. They'll be fast-tracked to heaven.
That's so smart.
Yeah, and it's kind of trying to extrapolate on what, in a sense, evangelism can look like to the world. The idea that, you know, people are just, they're not interested in you as an individual. They just want to sort of get another spiritual scalp and send it to heaven. So yeah, so it's those sorts of things. And the main character is an atheist who has cosmic issues with God, but particularly with Christianity, and just struggles with Christians and the hypocrisy of Christianity.
That's amazing. Yeah, that's quite the story too. I haven't read it myself, but the premise of it is pretty awesome. So
Thanks.
How did you come up with this?
Well, I mean, I think it was because when I've been to baptismal services before. I'm ordained into the Baptist denomination, but I'm not really big into labels and stuff, and so I'm not like I'm a staunch Baptist. I don't like that sort of speak.
Yeah.
But I happen to be ordained in the Baptist denomination, and so in our denomination, we have baptism of adults, or at least people who can think for themselves. So we don't baptize children necessarily.
Call themselves adults.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Exactly. Yeah. The jury could be out on that.
Yeah.
But the idea is, somebody who wants to be baptized and in full immersion and stuff, they do that in front of a kind of crowd. But when I've been to a few of those things, I just remember people afterwards sometimes saying, "Oh well, that guy's very close to God and all that at the moment, but what happens if they go off to university or college and they get exposed to other worldviews, heaven forfend,
right?
And they might end up slipping away and becoming a part of backsliding is the word they use in Christianity. And so the thought was, well, look, if you had a sniper in the crowd, just like pick them off the second they got up out of the baptismal font, as it were, they go straight to heaven. Now, obviously, I'm not advising that.
No.
It's completely psychopathic.
Nobody here's advising that.
No, please don't cut that bit out. The bit where I said I'm not advising it, I mean. But the point of that is almost to, I think, to demonstrate in some ways, you could say, the absurdity of some approaches to God and Christianity and evangelism, which is to say, that everyone's one thing or the other. That so people grow up and you are either a believer in God or you're not, or you're a Christian or you're an atheist, and you make one choice and you cross a certain line and you're in that zone, and then you make another choice and you're out of that zone. And what happens if you die when you're in the wrong zone? And to me personally speaking, that's a slightly unsophisticated view of human consciousness. I don't think human beings necessarily always slot into categories like that.
True.
And things are just, to me, a little bit more gray. We need categories, I suppose, but the older I get, the less tied to categories I am.
Yeah. I have to. I'm not a big fan of categories either. I mean, you need some labels and categories, but I mean, the extent of it that we go is just, to me, kind of ridiculous. But
Yeah, exactly. And I suppose that book is trying to explore that, and it's just saying, because of this categorization of that person's a Christian and that person's not, then this psychopath just believes he's actually doing a service by forcing someone to go through a religious ritual, which, a few minutes after they've gone through it, are suddenly clean and fit for heaven, and therefore it's best to kill them before they slip back into the zone of unbelief. And to me, that's an absurd idea and a scary one in some ways. And I like scary stuff. So the books explore scary scenarios which are based around, religious faith. Because I think religious faith, particularly Christianity, is quite scary.
Yeah, there's a lot of blood, sacrifices and stuff in there as well, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But I also just think the approach of churches and Christians can come across as scary, because I only became a Christian in my early 20s. And up to that point, I never went to church. And one of the reasons I avoided church was I just thought, you guys are like, you want to make me into the Stepford Wives or something. You want to turn me into, you're not interested in my interests or my brain or my desires or my humor. You want to turn me into a certain type of robot. And I just resisted that. And so when I did become a Christian, it's a kind of long story, but when I did, like people were just when this happened at university. When I went back home to the northeast of England where I'm from, people were just shocked because they assumed I would be a devil worshipper or a Satanist because I was so fascinated by the macabre. But ironically, my interest in the macabre kind of moved me towards an interest in church. It's kind of weird.
That is weird, yeah. How does that work? So you're a horror fan, like all the scary movies and stuff. So how did that bring you to Jesus specifically?
Well, I think it was because it would be watching films like, say, I mean, a classic and perhaps an obvious choice would be The Exorcist. Mm-hmm. But watching a film like that, I got confused because I heard about Christians saying that it was shocking, and I'd read quotations from Billy Graham, who reportedly had said that evil existed within the very celluloid of the film itself. And so for me, I'm like, that's the film for me. Then I'm seeking that film out because, I want that experience of fear, because I think sometimes it makes me feel alive, But also what I found with horror was, of all the genres, horror was the only the only genre I could find that really was taking the supernatural seriously, whereas other genres that Christians supported, ironically, were very unsupernatural, unless it was religious. So, a recent example would be, I remember talking to a Christian recommending, I think it was, it was like the Blair Witch Project, or as recommending a film, like, I should watch that, it's a great film. And they were saying, no, that's not a Christian type film. You shouldn't watch that. You should watch something like Jack Nicholson in The Bucket List, because it's life affirming and it's kind and all that. But I just thought, but to me, the Blair Witch Project is moving in more like exotic areas of thought, Right. It's exploring big issues, and that's what horror does. It explores the potential of objective good and evil. It gives this tantalizing question of what happens if there is something after death. What happens when we die? There's something else, and while it presents those things in a scary way, to me they were always fundamentally hopeful films, because they said, Peter, if you experience a ghost of an old lady walking up the stairs tonight when you go to the toilet, you will be crapping yourself, of course, but at the same time you'll think, like, whoa, like when you die, maybe there's something else. So I find them inherently hopeful. Stephen King, I think, has had that same attitude. I know when he wrote The Shining, he had a phone call with Stanley Kubrick, and Stanley Kubrick. Actually, it was Kubrick who had the hopeful thought. He said to Stephen King, "Don't you think ghost stories are inherently hopeful stories?" Because they imply life after death, so I'm more with Kubrick. Whereas Stephen King turned around and said, yeah, but what about hell? Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And so for him, his view of life and death was, for Stephen King, was informed by a pessimistic Christianity, perhaps. Whereas Kubrick's
hell's not the best place, It's pretty much a downer.
Yeah. So, but what I meant was like an assumption that everyone's going to hell, or most people are going to hell. Well, whereas Kubrick, I think, had a more open-minded view of, like, what happens if God really is as benevolent as they say he is? What happens if more people go to heaven than you think? What happens if hardly anyone goes to hell? What happens if hell is not what we think? So, so that's a long answer, but I would say horror films kind of were very subversive, because they came and they presented The Exorcist is a good example of, they presented Christianity as potentially a force of power from vampire.
Watered down, weak power, though. I mean, how long did it take for that demon to get out of the child? I mean, that was ridiculous. And then it still had power to kill somebody, Well,
no, that's very true. And the guy, the Father Karras, still has to kind of die and sacrifice.
Right.
Crap. I hope I haven't spoiled it for viewers.
Oh, oops.
Sorry about that, everyone.
Sorry.
But yes, you're right. It still has the pessimism of the powers of evil and all that stuff. But what I noticed was different was that in most areas of culture, like the clergy were either completely out of touch with reality and were kind of driving around like a vicar in a sort of English countryside, like, good morning, vicar, that sort of thing. Or they were like raging pedophiles, or they were, exploitative televangelists. And so my opinion of Christians from the media in general, it fed my negative feeling about Christianity. But then when I watched horror, I was like, oh, these guys here, actually, these priests are actually pretty heroic. You know, they're doing something that's quite positive. And that was quite subversive for me to see. I hadn't seen that sort of thing before.
Do you have a favorite horror pastor or preacher guy that was in a horror film, or?
Oh, that's a good question. I did recently rewatch Stephen King's Silver Bullet, and it's based on Cycle of the Werewolf, his novella. And in that, the idea. Well, I don't want to give it away, but the minister in that is quite interesting, and it's quite a kind of interesting allegory. So, but you'll find like religious themes like threaded throughout horror, and you'll also find horror, I think, threaded within the Bible itself. So for people who come to me and say it's inappropriate for a Christian to be drawn to horror, I suppose I just say, well, I think that's slightly unfair, because if God exists, of course, and he may not, but if God does exist, biblically speaking, he seems willing to paint deep, abstract ideas with very dark and scary colors. So why can't I?
Well, true, but he's supposed to be this loving, caring being. So when he does it, that makes you question that, right?
Oh, yeah, no, completely. So what I mean by being willing to include dark stories, I'm not suggesting that he's willing to perform evil acts. What I'm saying is the Bible itself is happy to report the horrors of like the history of the church and stuff. And also, like, you look at the book of Revelation, and that's just filled with monsters and, dragons drinking blood and waiting to eat babies. So, yeah, it's horrific. It's like
interesting, yeah.
And the author Will Self described the book of Revelation as a grand grimoire of tedium or something, which I did quite like his description. But he was just saying it's almost boring, the amount of horror that is in the book of Revelation. But I'm not suggesting, therefore, that God himself must be a person who enjoys inflicting horror, because if he is, I don't think I'd be interested in experiencing him. I suppose my Christianity is focused not so much on the whole Bible as itself, but is quite laser focused on Jesus and the example of
right.
him.
Well, most Christians are laser focused on Jesus anyways, and the happy things he says, and the rest of the stuff.
I don't know if they are, though, because I think a lot of Christians say they're laser focused on Jesus, but what they're actually laser focused on is the letter and law of the Bible. And so
what do you mean by that?
Well, what I mean by that is, Jesus does some things that are actually quite radical and progressive, and he is able to kind of present a view which is all about, putting others first and of treating everybody with inherent dignity.
Right. Well, that's a small part of Jesus, though. That's a small part. Later on, he's going to come back and burn everybody because they're not believing in Yahweh. He says he comes to bring a sword. He brings division. So yes, there are some happy, shiny Jesus parts, but there's also angry, vengeful, bloodthirsty Jesus.
Yeah, and I think there is vengeful, bloodthirsty Jesus, but what I'm saying is that I don't think that's the real Jesus, even if it is discussed within the Bible itself. I think Jesus, the idea of us being kind of created in the image of God, if indeed we are, then I think most of us, and my atheist friends, my Satanist friends, my Christian friends, most of us have, I think, a pretty fundamental sense of morality and goodness. And yet what happens with many Christians, and evangelical Christians particularly, they'll just wash over the message of Jesus, and they'll start pulling out all these other verses which are about vengeance, which are about the Canaanite genocide, and we'll sort of say, oh yes, it's okay for us to go and wipe people out. And what I'm trying to say is you don't take every verse of the Bible as literal. Jesus is the core of the Bible, and you have to judge it next to that. So if
I
there's
think
an image
Yahweh is the core of the Bible, is it not? His beliefs, his history, essentially, his attributes, his things he's done. It's kind of like a biography of him.
Yeah, well, you could say that, or you could say the Bible is a biography of humankind's growing relationship, trying to figure him out,
Trying to figure life out.
So, trying to figure life out, yeah, which is what we all are doing,
Right.
And me as a Christian now, I'm quite willing to be open to the possibility that Christianity is just nothing, like there's nothing to it, and it's just a fake.
This is going to be a big one. Why do you believe it specifically over all the other religions?
Well, I think it's obviously a lot to do with my kind of cultural background, and that if I'd been in a different culture, perhaps I would have been drawn to a different expression of a kind of divine being.
I'm just going to, right now, you're the first one to ever admit that.
Oh, really? Well, to me, it seems obvious to me.
It is, like to everybody else, too.
Yeah. But I think
that's
where potentially actually maybe I could come across as sort of quite dodgy and controversial to many Christians, because I'm just not prepared to be as territorial with God as maybe some of my other Christian friends or colleagues may be.
Interesting.
And so I'm not, so the people who say Christianity can be the only way, and they will point towards verses like Jesus saying, "I'm the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me." And they'll somehow be able to build an entire message that says that verse condemns all atheists and all Muslims and all Hindus. To me, that when you stop and think about that verse, it really does not necessarily say that at all. In the same way as I think the famous thing is the idea of kind of anonymous people experiencing God. And, when you're in an airplane, you're flying over Texas, let's say, and you may have fallen asleep and you don't know you're over Texas, or you may be awake and you're looking out the window and you see, hey, there's Texas. No matter if you're conscious of it or not, you're over Texas. And so the message of a kind of more generous Christianity would say, maybe there's more mystery to the story of God than we think. And maybe God is actually as generous and kind as he comes across in the Gospels.
Few pages in the Gospels, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, I would say it's more than a few pages, personally.
A lot of it deals with the blood sacrifice of it, how Jesus needed to die so that Yahweh was able to forgive people. He needed blood for this to happen. A lot of it is that. Like the Old Testament, a lot of it is Yahweh just saying, oh, praise me because I saved you from Egypt, which is a ridiculous idea. He didn't really save them from Egypt. He killed a bunch of people to show off his powers.
Yes.
I mean, it's disgusting and horrible. But
no, you're right. And I would not disagree. But that version of the cross is from a particular theological standpoint, which is kind of penal substitution, which is saying that what happened on the cross was punishment. God was so furious with the world, he had to let his anger out in some way, and so he said, "Son, you're up," and then pummeled him instead of the world, which there's so many songs talking about the beauty of that, but I think most thinking people can sit back and say, holy crap, if you did that to your kid, I'd recall social services straight away.
Right.
Because that's dysfunctional.
It's not right, yeah.
It's criminal.
So what do you believe Jesus died for?
Well, I think there's something mysterious going on at the cross, but I don't think it has to be about punishment.
Interesting.
Because the punishment approach, I think, is more informed by a kind of low-level human consciousness of what we think is the right thing to do. And so, like the justice system, for example, if someone commits a crime and they go to prison, like what is the highest goal of the justice system? Is it to punish an individual for a crime? And it's important to punish, by the way. If someone murders a family, I'm not suggesting, like praise Jesus,
baptize him and send him to heaven.
Free. Yeah, exactly. I'm not saying there shouldn't be consequences to crime, but I still think the goal of a wise justice system is not just punishment. It's ultimately rehabilitation and understanding, and to try and prevent these things happening again, but also to help the person involved in the crime. And for me, this this seems natural because whenever I see somebody who's committed a crime, a horrible one, let's say, I immediately, on one hand, I have the shocking sense of you scumbag, like a child murderer or something.
Right.
It's horrifying. For my book, The Frighteners, I did a whole chapter. This is a book about morbid interest and why people are drawn to the morbid and why I think it's okay. And there's a whole section in that about killer culture and murderabilia markets where people collect serial killers' hair. And I had a clump of Charles Manson's hair in my hand in a shop in York that was selling it by the strand for $40 each.
That's a thing.
And so I was, that was pretty wild. And I was exploring that whole thing. And for me, serial killers are shocking and disgusting and horrifying. And it's very natural for me to say, therefore, so all of those guys need to be, thrown in the pit and destroyed. But if it was my son who committed those crimes or my daughter, things become a lot more complicated.
Yeah.
Because I'm not only I'm saying, you know what, son, you should be punished for this because that was shocking. But I'm also asking questions. I'm trying to understand and hopefully trying to rehabilitate. So for me, I think the view that God's loving mission to the world is to basically mete out pure punishment on his son, which is what many people, Christians, believe, feels not very ambitious and not very reflective of God. And so maybe there's something else going on. And there's other theories about what was going on.
What do you believe on the cross, though? What do you believe Jesus died for?
I think I don't know, by the way, but I'm not inclined to believe that it was about God being this ravenous punisher, like a kind of domestic abuser or something. I don't think that. But
that's what the Bible makes him out to be, though. So why do you think Jesus died, though? Why do you believe he had to die?
Well, I don't think necessarily that is what the Bible teaches, but I do think that's what certain English translations of the Bible imply and what many Christians preach. So an example would be, if you look at the original texts, when it talks about God being like having anger over his people. If you look at some of the original words for the word anger, that's been translated as anger in English. And actually, the original word is more like anguish. There's quite a difference between me being angry at somebody and having anguish for a person.
Let's go with Psalms 137, 8 through 9. O daughter of Babylon, doomed to destruction, happy is he who repays you for what you have done to us, he who seizes your infants and dashes them against rocks.
A brilliant example and a shocking example. And I agree with you. So what I'm saying is that psalm only becomes a problem if you go for the line that you think that the Bible is the perfect expression of God's point of view.
There's a lot of that kind of stuff in here, though. Yahweh himself is Numbers 14:18. Yahweh is slow to anger, abounding in love, and forgiving sin and rebellion. But he does not leave the guilty unpunished. He punishes the children. He punishes the children for the sins of the father. And this is not the only place this is that.
No, you're absolutely right. But what I'm saying is that,
do you take those as translational errors, or how do you?
No, sometimes they are translational errors, but sometimes they are people. Like I said before, like you could either see the Bible as being like the perfect dictated word of God, let's say, and so you get yourself into knots then because you have to say, well, hang on,
all Scripture is God breathed. Useful for teaching, preaching, rebuking, correcting, training in righteousness, and all that stuff. So if all Scripture is God-breathed, and this is part of Scripture...
Yeah, but can you see what's happening? When you hear that sentence, all Scripture is God-breathed, you are instantly putting on a framework that you've heard from more fundamentalist Christians, which you think the word God-breathed means like God ordained or God agrees with, or rather what it could be is all Scripture has sort of God going through it. But for the Jews, for example, in the Old Testament, they sort of sometimes saw the Bible as kind of, or the Old Testament, as a kind of problem to be solved, as a grappling with, well, what was God trying to say through this? Is he saying this? Is he saying that? Whereas more evangelical Christians don't see it as a problem to be solved. They see it as a message to be preached wholesale.
They just kind of cut out those parts, is what I'm seeing here. The parts you don't like or don't understand, which is fine if you don't understand. I mean, but to cut them out, to leave them out of the Bible, to say that that's not part of what Yahweh did or wants, is kind of it. My mom calls them
like
scissor Christians. Scissor Christians.
Yeah.
You cut out what you want and what you don't like.
Well, I can appreciate why that sounds, lazy or
No,
avoiding the question or whatever.
Avoiding it. Yeah.
But
Mm-hmm.
but again, it goes back to is the Bible the story of God and his perfect revelation to the world, or is it the story of human beings trying to figure God out? If it's the latter, it means that there can be moments within the Bible where people record stuff and what they think God would want to do. Yeah, God has commanded us to go and, God has said, quote, destroy the Canaanites. But did God actually ordain that? Or was it just recorded as they wanted to do that? And so this is why I suppose I say I'm focused on Jesus rather than the whole spread of the Bible. Because
and it's not even the whole thing of Jesus either. You take parts that you like. Again, the part where he comes back and brings fire to the earth and kills me because I'm a non-believer. You don't take that part. Why? Because I don't think that matches up
with
your idea
a natural
of what Jesus
sense
is.
Of consciousness. Yeah, I think we all have a conscience. And we all have this sense of, what we can just self-evident truths of what we think is right and what we think is not right.
Mm-hmm.
And the problem is, I think Christianity has been so influenced by modernism and science, let's say. And I'm not anti-science, by the way. I'm very pro-science. but in this regard, Christians have, I think, confused things because they've tried to, particularly in the last 100 years or so, they've tried to present Christianity as a scientific method, as it's a framework, it's simple, it's systematic theology, it all makes sense. And for me, though, Christianity is a mystery. And at the heart of this mystery is this guy, Jesus, who, to me, does express great love for the world and the stuff that resonates with me, the challenging prejudice and treating people with dignity. And so when I see stuff that blatantly goes against that, like say talks about hell, for example,
right?
And you could say, well, hang on, Peter, Jesus spoke more about hell than anyone else. And it's like, well, hang on a minute. He spoke about Gehenna, which is this sort of
hellish place.
Yeah, but it was an actual place just outside of Jerusalem where they just chucked all the rubbish. And there's no reason why Jesus wasn't just saying, they'll go to Gehenna.
Or he was using that as a description because that's the only thing they knew about.
Well, perhaps. But what I'm saying is I personally, I don't think that translates to the kind of medieval Dante Alighieri Divine Comedy view of hell. But we're so conditioned by our culture to read these texts in that way, and also so influenced by modernism and science to say there can never be a mystery. Whereas the Bible itself, it has contradictions. It's got clear contradictions, and it's got proverbs where you'll read a proverb and it'll say one thing, the next thing it'll say something else.
Chapter 1 and 2, right off the bat, Genesis, they contradict each other.
Yeah, and to me, with my approach to Christianity, and I'm not saying my approach as in it's my own bespoke approach. I mean, there's lots of flavors to Christianity, and there's loads of other kind of chilled out Christians.
Lots of versions of the truth.
Well, not so much versions of the truth, I would say, because what is the truth in a sense?
Each person seems to have their own.
Yeah, and
each Christian seems to have their own. Like you, for instance, you have your own version of Christianity, your own version of Jesus, and each Christian has their own version of what they think Jesus is, what they think Yahweh is, and it essentially all comes from their own head, and that's where he's at.
But I think that's the case for every human being who ever lived. We can only work on the limited light that we have, and we try to come up with the best approach we can. And that's why I personally have a generous attitude towards everybody, be they believer or not.
Yeah.
And so I'm just not in the business of sort of sitting there. Like, for example, with my books or with my podcast that I'm doing or other things, people can think, you're talking about scary things so that you can kind of swing into Gothic culture and pluck people up and save them and turn them into, Billy Graham's. And
Oh, please don't.
And to only listen, and only listen to songs with major chords, and that's just not where I'm at. I think I'm quite persuaded by the Franciscan monk called Richard Rohr, who's sometimes controversial but quite well loved by some. And he says that life kind of moves in two containers or two compartments. And so the first half of life is we have to have some black and white thinking, really. We need to be able to sort of have rules in our head to work out how to exist in the world. So, don't talk to strangers. They could be bad. Or if you're in a Christian world, you may have been told there's no other way to God except through Jesus. And so therefore the Muslim is going to hell and all these sorts of things.
Yeah.
And you have these things to work things out, and you need them in some ways to try and work out who you are. However, what happens is, maybe not the last one, but the one about, But you need rules, as in the kid saying to a kid, "Don't cross the street,"
right?
Without
basic
looking.
Rules.
You have to have basic rules.
Not
to work
like
things out.
Yahweh's, stone adulterers, or if you enter my tent with oil on your head, you be stoned, or don't touch my mountain while I'm on it. Stuff like that is kind of ridiculous, right? Yeah.
Well, exactly. Well, no, yes, exactly. So precisely. So there are these like sort of very strict letter of the law things that push against our human conscience, but we say, oh, well, it's written down, we should do it. So we have these kind of black and white thinking, really. But then gradually, as we grow older, we start to we just get more data. So, for example, the Christian guy goes to work and he's working alongside a Hindu, and he's like, man, that Hindu guy's awesome. he's lovely, he's kind, he's diligent. Like I cannot work out the difference between me and that Hindu guy, apart from the fact that he's into Hinduism and I'm into Christianity. And to me, the more data we have of the real world and real people, and the more we're exposed to other worldviews, which I think is very important. Sadly, some Christians try not to be.
Satan,
Well, yeah, exactly, because they'll see Satan. Like parents who I've heard say, "Oh my goodness, my kid is going to go to university," or like I mentioned before, and be influenced by other faiths.
Right.
Whereas to me, I'm like, no, we need as much data as possible, and the more data we get, I think, the more our black and white frameworks become gray. And we start thinking, you know what, I'm not fully sure. So I can sit here quite confidently and say, Mike, I'm not fully sure if God exists or not. I'm not fully sure if the Bible is, just a myth. I'm not even fully sure if Jesus is who he says he is.
Interesting.
But what I'm left with is I still have to live. And so I want to find a worldview that resonates with me.
Humanism.
But humanism doesn't, for some reason, I don't know why, it just doesn't resonate with me, because I find something so beguiling about a character like Jesus.
Character.
But that,
you labeled it there. Character. You've got this character, and humanism doesn't need any magic or characters or anything supernatural. Just be the best person you possibly can. Do no harm. I mean, it's pretty Jesus-y, but just without all the bloodshed and magic.
Well, yeah. I mean, I can happily drop all the bloodshed and magic stuff, which is what. Sorry, not the magic stuff. Drop the bloodshed stuff. But
that's cutting out. That's cutting out the whole purpose of Jesus' death.
Yeah, only if you insist that Jesus' death is a systematic framework that we can simply say that's exactly what
Hebrews
happened.
9:22, without the shedding of blood there is no forgiveness, meaning Yahweh is unable to forgive people without this certain blood. This blood has to be shed, and you have to cover people in it, and you have to sing about it. It's disgusting, but you know what I mean.
Yeah. No, I mean, you're quite right, and verses like that would make that topic grayer for me. You'd think, oh, well, what's it saying?
But you take your scissors and you cut it out.
You could say I do.
Yeah.
Or I just try to figure out like what is this mystery at the heart of this mystery of Christianity.
Where's the mystery?
Is
though?
this person Jesus?
It explains it pretty
is,
clearly.
I don't think it's that. I don't think it's completely clear because
what do you struggle with your belief in particular?
Well, I mean, an example would be, for example, there are kind of there's clear texts that would say things that are, I don't know, like would say women shouldn't preach or people shouldn't be gay.
They
those
should
sorts of
remain
things.
silent in churches. They should
Yes.
go and ask their husbands at home if they have questions. I mean, it's pretty bad.
Yeah, exactly. Quite right. Yes, exactly. And so for all of my life, I've been a very kind of libertarian type of dude, really. So I have no problem with people being gay or trans or whatever. I just don't mind. And for me, when I walk in a room, I'm doing what I believe Jesus was doing, which was just looking at the inherent dignity of whoever that person is, no matter who they are. And so I suppose where I struggle is encountering other Christians who, in a sense, have raised the Bible above the person of Jesus. And so it's a little bit like I've heard it said this way, like Catholics.
How do you separate the two? How do you separate Jesus from the Bible? How do they raise the Bible? Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, because I just think Jesus, or you know, if you want to be all over Winfrey about it, you could call it like the divine presence, or I don't know what. But but my name, you know, Jesus, as I discover him in the Bible, as I've experienced my kind of relationship with Jesus, as it were, I would say Jesus is much more than just the Bible, because the whole universe is, to me, a fascinating arena in which you could potentially see the fingerprints of God. Like I say, I could be wrong, but my feet, I suppose, in some ways, Mike, you could almost say, logically speaking, I'm an agnostic. Like purely in terms of logic, like I'm not fully sure. But in practical terms, I'm sure you've been through trauma. I've been through trauma in my life. I've had
Most
bad
people
experiences. Have. Exactly. And what I find in those moments, I found faith to be a really quite incredible experience and comfort. But
right. It's a crutch, though. At that point, it's a crutch. You don't have any proof that Jesus is there at all. So at that point, that comfort, that feeling that you have is nothing more than a crutch that you will have to get rid of eventually and wake up and welcome to the real world. You know, this person's dead. They're not in heaven. They're not waiting for you. You know, it's...
Yeah, I don't agree. Because for a start, it implies that crutches are not necessary. Whereas if you break your leg,
right. If you go through an injury, something hurts you,
important.
you're going to need something to lean on, to rest on. So emotionally, you use Jesus.
Yeah, but what I mean is, like, you know, that phrase "Christianity is a crutch for the weak." In some ways,
I wouldn't say weak.
A crutch for someone who's struggling.
It. So yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Someone who's going through some stuff or doesn't understand what's happening. These are the things that it's a Band-Aid, it's a placebo, it's a crutch. It doesn't really do any good. It may help them feel better at the moment, but reality is still there, and they still need to accept that.
Yeah. But for me, it isn't just about, like, you know, I've invented a kind of Jesus-shaped teddy bear that I want to cling to, because I am still, that would be so weird, especially if it was crucified. but no, for me though, like, it's much more than that, because I am persuaded, not 100%, but I am persuaded by evidence of things like why do I keep finding most people I meet have a really strong moral compass, whether they be atheist or Christian or whatever. That intrigues me and makes me think, you know, if there is a kind of divine force of the universe, and it looks like the kind of person I think, you know, that Jesus came across as loving and caring and stuff, then that is more evidence for me that maybe there is a God, or just the existence of the universe, and the order and design of all that. But that doesn't mean that I don't also admit my doubts. But again, in the middle of it, I'm a human being who lives and needs a worldview that makes sense to me. And I've attempted to, you know, experience the sort of atheist worldview, And I just don't find it as convincing, because it doesn't explain as many things for me.
It doesn't need to explain anything, though. That's the thing is I can say I don't know or I don't fully understand and not insert a child-killing, magical, bloodthirsty deity. You know what I mean?
No, I mean, you're right, but I hope you're hearing me that I'm not planning on inserting a child-killing deity either.
No, but that's what the Bible describes him as, and I'm going off of what the Bible actually says. And to me, it's describing a child-killing, a documented child killer. I mean, look at the Ark. There's one thing right there. The Passover, there's another. That's just two incidences. That's leaving out the other parts where he says he's going to starve children, bash children, burn children, abort children, all that stuff.
Yeah.
So
I'm in agreement in the sense that, if the Bible really is the perfect revelation of who God is in its entirety, and it is not to be questioned, grappled with, or explored, or doubted at times, if that's what the Bible is, then I wouldn't be interested in a God like that. Yeah. But what I have had is experience myself of the positive side of being a Christian, and it has really made I've had the negative, by the way, but I've also had the positive. And so my character, for example, in my books, Matt Hunter, he's the opposite. He's different. He's a staunch atheist, and he shares, I would say, probably most of the things that you've said as well. He would say, there's a great line in Martian Chronicles by Ray Bradbury, and it's like where a Martian is talking to Colonel Wilder, and he says something like, can't you just exist? Can't you just embrace the gift of pure being? And it's like, can't you just chill out and enjoy just being who you are, and you don't have to build this fairy tale framework around it? And for me, I like Matt Hunter, and I keep him atheist. There's no plan on turning him into a kind of drop to his knees Jesus follower at any point, because I can also see the beauty in atheism. Because I attended a funeral a little while ago of a friend who died, and he was atheist, and it was a humanist's funeral. And I've got some Christian friends who would say, oh my goodness, that they don't have faith in God, so they would purely be in despair. And I said to them, you know what, actually having faith in God can sometimes make life more complicated, more frustrating, more confusing, because you're thinking, well, my friends just died of cancer very young. Why would a benign God love that? Allow that. So I think faith does sometimes make things more complicated. But I still think, as human beings, we are kind of drawn over on one side of the horse to the other. And so what do you mean? For me, what I mean is, so intellectually, I could almost be an agnostic, saying I'm not fully sure. Right.
Sounds like you are mainly agnostic, but you've just got this version of Jesus rolling around in there somehow. We got to get rid of.
Yeah, I like the image of him rolling. Yeah. But faith is far more than just the intellectual exercise. It's also about the emotional exercise. It's about the kind of the deep heart experiences, for want of a better metaphor. And so,
but what I find, need it though. Why do you need the faith? If you if you get rid of that magic part, everything's be fine.
Because I'm not convinced that it's just purely magic, and I'm not convinced that the world is here purely by accident. I'm open to it being that.
True, but you insert Jesus and Yahweh. Why? Because you grew up with it. You even admitted you might have Brahma or Muhammad. Yeah. If you went that route. So you're pretty convinced right now, even though you might have grown up in a different religion and you would have been that religion.
Yeah. Well, I totally get it, and I can also get why maybe some of your listeners could be potentially frustrated. But I would say, that's because they may be coming from a worldview which is forcing them into being dualistic thinkers. And so it's always about, you're either Republican or you're Democrat or you're Christian or you're Muslim. And for me, I don't see that we have to have those labels as such. I just think human beings are this kind of interesting and wonderful jumble of contradictions and beauty. And so I've now, as I've grown older, I've just become quite comfortable in saying I can be no other. I've tried, and it doesn't imply because I want God to exist that God therefore doesn't exist, in the same way as, if I'm a fireman, if I'm in a fire and I hope the fire brigade comes, it doesn't mean the fire brigade isn't coming just because I want them to come. And I just don't fall off the horse the way, which is to deny, because there's also like the existence of the supernatural and strange kind of paranormal experiences and stuff like that, which I am cynical about, but I leave a bit of the door open.
Do you believe in ghosts and witches and curses and all that?
Well, I mean, I believe in witches because I've interviewed loads of them before. For
real witches,
for a
like with
magazine
real witch powers.
Oh, like powers and stuff. Yeah. I do believe that there's the potential for strange things to happen, but I would say I mostly err on the side of caution, particularly when, like, my new novel has just come out called Possessed, which explores demonic possession, and I'm very much on the same side as Matt Hunter with this, where there's been this recent kind of explosion in people asking for the ritual of exorcism, and just more and more people these days are asking for it. And for Matt Hunter, he's totally cautious about that and says that it's more to do with kind of mental health issues and the stigma that we have around mental health,
right?
And how ironically it's quite interesting actually, because one of the reasons why more people are asking for exorcism is because we have stigmatized mental health so much and live in such a dualistic blame culture that if someone has, let's say, bipolar, they will think, well, someone's to blame for this, and it's me, because it's come from me, it's come internally from me, and that just adds to the trauma and pain. And then along comes this system of demonic possession, which says, well, actually, what happens if you could blame it on a foreign invader?
Blame it on Satan.
Blame it on Satan, yeah.
Do you believe in Satan?
I think Satan is certainly talked about in the Bible. So I'm open to that potentially. But do I believe that, demons are on the march and that, the devil stopped me from getting a car park space, or indeed that the devil is within people? I just don't know. But can you see how, like, my response of I'm not sure could be seen by some as wishy-washy or whatever.
Lukewarm, but they would call you. They'd say Yahweh would spit you out.
My mouth.
Yeah.
Exactly. But someone like Richard Rohr would say, in some ways, the more data you receive, the more gray you get. That is, in some ways, being more mature in terms of wisdom, because you're willing to say, I'm not fully sure. So in the midst of it, I'm going to try and be the best person I can be. And Jesus, to me, is this amazing model of that. But it's still more than that. There's
a lot of people that are really good people that you don't require the magical part for. I agree. You can. There's people alive today you could probably associate with that. But when you said the more info you get, the more gray it is, correct? I see that as the more info you get, the more clear things become.
Yeah.
As opposed to graying out or black and white. But I can see now that there's no magic in the world. That if I watch Harry Potter, a demon isn't going to come inside me and make me do things. Things I was taught as a kid. So when as you grow older, you grab more knowledge, more understanding, more logic. And you kind of put those things aside. I see you're definitely on a journey, and you're hanging on to that Jesus part. I'd be very curious to talk to you in about 10 years to see where you're at now. But then,
I'd probably be like Satanist. No, not really.
But to me, you're almost a humanist. And
but to me that doesn't bother me. Because
good. Because I might label this
because I don't feel I don't want to be boxed in by any particular kind of label, in a sense. Yeah. But what I would say is, like I say, so logically you could say you're almost like agnostic. I don't think I'm a humanist as such, but in some ways maybe I'm. But for an example would be, on the days that I don't believe in God, and those days happen, I tend to pray I tend to talk to God in frustration about the possibility of him not existing.
Uh-huh.
And I think that may tell you something, that even when I don't believe in God, I still feel drawn to it because
what you've done. You know, you've been a part of this whole life. Of course you're going to be. It's like you quit smoking. I'm still drawn to that cigarette. You know, it's been a part of my whole life. It's a habit at that point. You know?
But I suppose that, I mean, the point is, like, I haven't been with it my whole life. Like, it's only until I was in my 20s and I was very against Christianity.
But still a long
church.
time. It's still quite a bit of time to be in it, you know,
to be
absorbed with it.
No, that's true. But I would equally say, you know, for you or some of my friends who have different worldviews, you have also kind of lived within the oxygen that you have had. And to me, I don't really see why, like, you have to be like me, or like I have to be like you.
Yeah,
I just tend to say, well, how about you and I kind of enjoy each other's company, respect each other, and journey together.
Well, I'd like people to believe things that are true. I'd like people not to believe in fairy tales anymore. Those kinds of things are detrimental. And if you believe in true things that are in reality, I believe as a society we can progress a lot more. That's where I'm at with that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that that in some senses that's very true because there's so many ways. I mean, and particularly these days, it's getting crazy. You know how particularly like fundamentalist evangelicalism. Particularly in America, has just is turning into such an un-Christ-like expression. It boggles the mind, really, and is shocking. But at the same time, I'm just not personally convinced that a world without the experience of something beyond us is necessarily going to be a world like a Shangri-La of kindness and love. I'm not suggesting that, you know, if you got rid of religion, then the atheists would take over and everyone would get murdered. So that's not what I'm saying. But I'm saying I'm not prepared to kind of say atheism has nothing to offer the world. And I'm also not prepared to say that Christianity has nothing to offer the world. And in my personal experience, it's almost like you want to live your life by what you value, you know, and what resonates with you. It's like what music gets you up dancing at the party. And for you, you know, the pure rationalist approach gets you up dancing. For me, that gets my toe tapping violently because I totally sympathize with it. And I think you may be right. But in all of my years, consistently, I don't think I'm kitted out to be like that. Right. And I don't think that means you're superior to me because you can cope without a God.
I don't find myself superior, so just so.
No, exactly. And I don't think. But sadly, this is what happens with the dualistic thinking. So everything becomes about sides. Right. So the Christian is saying, "Well, you atheists, you know, you don't have any morals," and it's like, don't be stupid. Of course, some of the atheists I know are some of the. Like if you compare them with some Christians, oh my goodness, they're absolutely beautiful, you know. So, but I think I'm embracing the contradictions, and in the heart of it, the Bible itself it's almost like, you know, when you talk about Jesus being like an incarnation of God, let's say, right? And there used to be like this problem in the early church of trying to work out, well, how human was Jesus and how human was and how divine was he? Right. And people tend to hate the idea of the humanity of Jesus. You know, like, did Jesus ever crap his pants, right? I mean, like, it's like, oh my word, I gotta get back to my, oh man, missed the toilet, crap his pants, right? For some people,
well, he didn't wear pants. I don't think he wore pants. Well, we can have an argument about that one. There you go.
Actually, but yeah, that's a good point. Oh my word, it just hit sandals instantly. That's awful. But anyway, so
that's a first on the show. It's a first.
Yeah, but you know, like describing Jesus in human terms ruffles people's feathers in a way because they think, but I can't handle the idea that he could have a humanness about him. But the point of the incarnation is to say this is God in meat, as it was, where the carn, you know, the carn words like carnivore, chili con carne. It's like God in meat, God in a meat suit. And and ironically, this same argument is happening, particularly today, about the Bible. And people are not willing to see that the Bible also has humanness and has frailty and has normal human beings inspired perhaps by God, but inspired doesn't have to mean dictated word for word.
Yeah,
it's this journey of people trying to figure it out.
I agree. It is a journey of people trying to figure it out, goat herders and people who thought there were curses and whatnot. But to believe that it's true, to know that it is these people, this essential attempt at a historical record, and to know that there's exaggerated stuff in there, and then to still believe it at that point, that's what baffles me.
No, I understand that, but I think what you're suggesting is that this is a choice.
I do not believe belief is a choice. No. Yeah. No.
Yeah. Do you know what I mean? Like, so, like if I said to you, well, you need to change your opinion on this,
I can't
you'd
choose to
probably
believe
find that
it.
quite hard,
Right.
because this is just who you are. And so the thought that
The information
that God,
I've been processing in my head, that my decision, my as it turns out, I can't think of the word right now, but you know what I mean. This is what I've come up with what my life experience I've seen. I grew up in that evangelical holy roller crazy environment. I taught Sunday school for a minute. I did the whole puppet ministry. So I
oh,
know.
not puppets.
Yeah.
I'm not surprised you're a humanist atheist. Flip that.
I always played Satan. That was my favorite character for some
did you?
reason.
Nice.
But it just,
Satan
I grew up out of it. I read it, and I put away my childish thoughts of hell, which were a tough one to do. Let me tell you, that was very difficult.
No, and that's and you kind of, in an Oprah Winfrey type way, like found your path, and as did I. But ironically, what my path did was the opposite trajectory. And it's similar to actually a lot of people. So, some people say to me, well, belief in God is not much different from believing in Father Christmas or the Easter Bunny and stuff.
Santa Claus.
But it is Santa Claus, yeah. But it is quite different. Oh, it's very different in the simple
It's more violent.
sense that, well, I don't know. Have you seen Silent Night, Bloody Night, the horror movie? But,
Good point. Good point.
But what happens with Christians particularly is, which is different from Father Christmas, is that I have yet to meet anybody who has grown into a belief in Father Christmas. Most people grow out of that.
True.
And yet I keep meeting like intellectual people, decent people, solid, normal human beings who have grown into this faith in God, and so have I.
That's completely different, though. I mean, there's no grown adult that really believes in Santa Claus. There's a million grown adults that believe in a magical man in the sky. So that makes sense that people would go into that as opposed to the Santa Claus thing.
Well, no, but it's just what I mean is like sometimes God is listed like on the same tick list, as the Easter Bunny and the flying spaghetti monster and stuff. And I just think it's much more complicated than that. But again, the worldview that says, well, you need to, choose your side, choose your fighter, is to me, exactly. Is to me a kind of almost like a kind of low level version of what humans are, because as we grow and we experience things, for some of us can become grayer, and so for me my grayness is a source of comfort in some ways, because I realize I can be myself. When I first became a Christian, I was like, oh, but I don't have any problem with other religions, I don't have any problem with that, I don't think God is going to be like sort of endlessly poking people with a pitchfork in hell. but then surely I'll get on board with the official line at some point, because that's what Christianity is, isn't it? And then as I grew and started to look at the Bible and appreciate it as I think what it is, which is this kind of ongoing story of humans trying to work out what God's like, and the pinnacle perhaps being Jesus. For me, I felt, well, you know what? I'm allowed to be me.
Right. Yeah, no, of course you're allowed to believe what you want to believe, and I'm not going to think less of you because you believe in this stuff. I just, you said you had a relationship, and that particular phrase always gets me. I don't understand how you have a relationship with this being. Can you please explain to me your relationship?
No, that's right. It's like, because you might be like, do we go bowling together, for example?
Right. Do you have a
yeah.
conversation with this person? Do they talk back to you? Do they sit in your
Yeah.
room and play the guitar? What goes on?
I always try to high five him and he leaves me hanging. It's so embarrassing, especially in public. It's like, come on, God.
Yeah, don't do that.
The relationship side of it is, I personally find the most important. And what it means is, and do feel free to see this as wishful thinking, but this is not how I see it.
Yeah.
Because I'm really, really open to the possibility that there really is a God, as I am open to the possibility that there isn't. It means that potentially there really is a force in the universe, a person in the universe who is kind and caring and who is always there. And that is more than just a kind of lucky rabbit's foot to me.
How is he always there, though? How do you know he's there?
Well, you don't always know he's there, in a sense, because that's the point of this mystery. This is the point of faith. Like, faith is not like
wishful thinking.
Faith is not wishful thinking. Faith is supposed to be based on evidence. And people who have faith that are based on, well, I just have a childlike faith, and the pastor says I should believe in God, so therefore I do. I don't buy that.
Right.
My faith is based on, I am fully not sure exactly how the cosmos came to be. Could well have been by pure accident. I tend to be more like a kind of theistic evolutionist, by the way.
It could have been an alien that farts out galaxies. We have no idea.
Oh, my word, yeah, like Battlestar Galactica style. Well, yeah, exactly. But exactly, because we have no idea, in some sense, we have to find one worldview that fits. And by the way, Christianity doesn't always fit with me because I'm sometimes in clashing. I'm clashing with like established.
You're
Christian
not
thought.
a typical Christian in a sense. You don't believe the whole Satan, the whole blood for forgiveness. A lot of that stuff you're not buying into.
Yeah, but I mean, I don't know. It depends on how many Christians you know or hang out with. But there is a growing number of Christians. I guess they call it progressive Christianity. There are growing numbers who who believe there's a sort of like a new reformation going on. That's probably a bit grand, but like a sort of a realization that perhaps the church has been so influenced by evangelicalism and the insistence that faith is a framework, a circuit board that always makes sense. There are growing numbers who are, questioning that and being more open-minded, and yet they're not the type who can just switch the belief bit off.
Right, it takes a long time. It's like I said, I didn't leave the church one day. That was. I decided this wasn't it anymore. It's a progress for sure, especially that hell part. That even after you stop believing, that threat of hell that they've instilled upon you is still there. It lingers for a long time. So religion is not easy to leave. It's steps. You take steps, and it's a process.
Yeah, so. I mean, do you still have like echoes of that fear then?
I don't anymore. Maybe about 5 years ago, I might have still had a little bit of that fear in the back of my mind of that hellfire. It was pretty indoctrinated into me. It's all I knew was this world. So it was pretty hard to break free. And I see you on that journey. I see a lot of other Christians as well on that journey to just leaving all of it behind. You're collecting the parts you like, the humanistic parts, the progressive parts, the parts that don't make any sense. You just kind of leave behind, or make an excuse for, oh, that wasn't really what they meant. Stuff like that. Yeah, that's what I see.
I do get what you're saying, but I think what's interesting about your story and your background is that, I suppose for you can look at others and say, well, look, you're a Christian because of your upbringing or your whatever. To me, it sounds like you may be a humanist or an atheist because of your really bad experience of Christianity.
Actually, I picked up the Bible and read it. That's what really turned me.
Yes, but you read it with a framework. You read it with glasses on that said, whenever it says God's anger, it means he's coming to kick ass. And so you've always assumed like, that's that the Bible was this totally, you're supposed to take it on board. And yes, indeed, God would have been, like waving his pom-poms when they were dashing kids against the rocks. And it's like, whoa, what happens if
these
that's
were the enemies of Yahweh? He's in the stories that I read, he's okay with his enemies' children being killed, burnt, and whatever. He doesn't seem to mind that.
Yeah, and that's why I think I think we underestimate human consciousness, like the conscience. Sorry. So much, and I'm sick of this when I'm with Christians, and they'll say, when you appeal to feelings, and the sense of what is right and what is wrong, and you say, well, I don't think God would dash a kid against a rock because that doesn't feel right, and because everyone's so influenced by this insistence that faith has to be this circuit board and it has to be logical, make all sense. It says, well, feelings are such an unimportant aspect of human nature. We shouldn't pay attention to that. So don't be lily-livered. If it says said God killed the baby, woohoo! God killed the baby,
and he must have had a good reason.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. You must have had a good reason, and you get yourself into all of these knots trying to explain why God is not as psychopathic as he appears to be. Or you could say, what happens if the stuff about us being made in the image of God, all of us, not just Christians, every single one, you, me, what happens if there's something in that? And what happens if this goodness that I see in others is an example of a sort of divine fingerprint on people?
But what if it's all a fairy tale? What if it's all rubbish? What if it's all just made up stuff? And, there's some happy, shiny Jesus parts in there. Love your neighbor. Great. We can take that out. But we don't need the rest of it. Stoning people for kids for being disobedient, or picking up sticks or having to kill something because Yahweh is unable to forgive without bloodshed.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I am out of time with this, but I did have one more thing for you.
Yes.
Have you seen, first off, what's your favorite horror film?
Oh, I do love a 1980 haunted house movie called The Changeling with George C. Scott. I love that film. It's melancholy, it's sad, it's about ghosts.
Now, have you seen a movie called Dead Alive?
Oh man, yes. That's actually known as Brain Dead in Britain, but it's like I kick ass for the Lord.
That's the one.
Yes. Oh man, it's an amazing,
I was
amazing
hoping
film.
you would say that. When you said kick ass earlier, man, I just went right to that. I love that scene. That is so funny.
The gore level in that is off the charts.
Unbelievable. You thought Evil Dead was bad.
Oh yeah, I know, this is like on steroids.
I got the extra with the lawnmower scene, which is just unreal.
Oh my goodness, yeah.
It's ridiculous.
And the ear drops off in the custard. It's all coming back.
And they eat it, and it's so terrible. Oh yeah, it's a great film. I highly recommend it. Not for anybody with a weak stomach, though. Definitely not.
Yeah. And I would say, right, and this sounds weird, right, but like the joy that a film like that can bring, again, is just like this. What is this? Why is this making me so happy?
Why am I laughing at this?
Yeah, exactly. And it's so contradictory. It's like, and this is what my book, The Frighteners, is about. It's like, why would human beings be drawn to the macabre when it's horrible? But it's because human beings are not dualistic. We are so complex. And I love that. I love the complexity of human nature. And I think, why make religion, Christianity or religion itself, or God, who in theory created the world, created us all, why make that more simplistic than perhaps it really is?
Well, I'll let you have the last word here. Plug your book and podcast and all that shenanigans.
Oh, yes. Yeah. I forgot I didn't mention that. Right. Yes. Well, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, if you wanted to check out my podcast, I started this new podcast called Creepy Cove Community Church, and it's just quite new, and it's basically, imagine if there was a church that existed on a cliff-top peak in a haunted, mysterious fishing town where all horror movies actually happened, and imagine if they started broadcasting their services every 2 weeks. And so that's what this show is. Every 2 weeks, a church service, in inverted commas, comes out via podcast, and it's complete with, Gothic sounding hymns and meditations, yes, and characters and appearance from horror movie people, like Carrie or, Seth Brundle from The Fly or Danny from The Shining, all these crazy things. And it's designed to be a place for people to just be entertained, or it's just comedy. But it's also, if people want to have that space, a kind of safe space in which to explore non-judgmental Christianity. And the point of that is as well. And I said, I just recorded one recently, and I was in the prayer time. I'm trying to say, whoever, at one point I say something like, and if you're out, if you need something to give you encouragement today, draw that from your faith. Or if you don't believe, draw your encouragement from your non-faith. Whatever your view is, you can draw your encouragement from that. Yeah, so it's not a place to convert people. It's a place to explore spirituality with vampires.
Well, you do, again, you have a lot of humanistic aspects in your sermon itself, too, because you go to both, if you believe this, but if you don't believe this, it's good to do this with your life and look for the better in people and stuff like that. So for that, I do commend you on that. Your voiceovers are amazing. Your voice works are pretty funny. If religious or not, they're fun to check out. So go ahead and check those out. I'll put a link to them in the show notes for everybody. But I thank you so much for your time today. You've been fantastic. I've had a blast.
It's been a pleasure. It's been fun.
Thank you, man. We will keep in touch for sure.
Yeah, we'll do.
All right, talk to you.
Take it easy, man. Bye.
And that's all the podcast there is for you today. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed the show and want to support what I do, then stop by the Patreon page today at patreon.com/BSW the podcast and sign up to be a supporter of the show. Your episodic tithes of $1 or more will help me upgrade some equipment, spend more time working on material, and boost my reach. Thanks to the cosmic powers of the internet, it is now possible to buy me a beer or coffee online. Simply go to buymeacoffee.com/BSW the podcast and click the appropriate buttons. If money is tight, which is something I completely understand, please like, share, or leave a review for the show. As always, you can find me at the Bible Says What Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, or Instagram pages. You can also reach me at bswthepodcast@gmail.com. And no matter which platform you use to listen to your podcasts, don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you won't miss out on the next episode. Until then, would you kindly pick up your Bibles and read them?